Hello there, my Stampin' friends. Susan here with Pumpkin Hill Stampers. I have a Stampin' Show and Tell for you today, and today we're going to be using our watercolor pencils, a sponge dauber with a water technique, I'll show you that in a minute, and Poppy Parades with the Peaceful Moments stamp set. When these came out last year, I couldn't stop using them and using them together. They were bundled together. But then they kind of fell on the wayside, so I've decided to use them for this project and bring them back out and play with them. So don't forget to use those lovely stamp sets that we had to have, but then we kind of get distracted with everything new. Okay, so there's our stamp sets. I'm going to be using the leaf and the kind of folded over Poppy, and I'm going to be using Stays On ink because this is going to be a watercolor technique. And from my pencils, I'm using Real Red, Old Olive, and Daffodil Delight. So I like to keep my pencils in one of these little tiny stamp boxes. That way I've got the colors on the front. I keep my blender pen in there because a lot of times I use my blender pen with my pencils. But it helps me just kind of keep them all together and I know where they are in my stash. Okay, so these are my three colors today. So the first thing we have to do for this technique, this is called a Monet water technique. So we're kind of going to do a watercolor, not a watercolor wash, but a messy watercolor, I guess is the best way I can say it. So I'm using my Stays On because we are using watercolored pencils and water to make the background. So I'm going to stamp my Poppy images first. Okay, so I'm kind of going to do an active edge. Just kind of come across with Poppies. Looks like I'm going to get about 4 in there, so we'll deal with that. Okay, now I'm going to do some leaves. And I just kind of want to fill in the space, but I don't really want them to be too overlapped. So kind of space them out a little. Put them in at different angles. Leave some white space between them. Okay. So if I wanted to get super fancy, I might want to do some masking and make some of them go up behind it. But for today's video, I'm not going to do that. So, okay. So there is my stamping for the moment with my Stays On. So now we need to do some color application, right? So I'm going to start with my yellow. Looks like I could use to sharpen that, but I don't know where my sharpener is right now, so we're just going to color with it. Okay, I'm going to kind of color in all the white space with the yellow. Okay, and you're going to notice I'm not being super careful where I put the color. I'm just kind of putting it in there between the images. Okay, just kind of scribbling. And when we get done, you won't really know that that's what I did, but that's how I start out. So I'm just going to fill in all this white space with the yellow. And this is one of those techniques with watercoloring where if you put color on and then we do the technique and then it dries and you want to put a little more color on, you can always go back and add more to your dry images. Okay, so there's my yellow. Now I'm going to do my flowers with the red. And again, I'm just going over the image, but I'm not worried about staying inside the lines. I'm not worried about getting the whole thing exactly colored. I'm just adding pigment to my background. Okay, and now for the leaves, I'm going to use, like I said, I'm using the Old Olive. And again, I'm not being super clean with my edges or anything. I'm just kind of applying it around and near the image. Now, this is a technique I originally learned when we had the watercolor crayons. Anybody remember when we had watercolor crayons? And you could do this technique where you colored it with the watercolor crayons, and then we used a spritzer or a brayer or a sponge to do this. So I'm kind of mimicking the old technique with the current products that we have. available to you. Alright, so you can see I stamped, and now I've colored, and now I'm going to do the watercolor part of it. So I have a little mess mat here. I've got my spritzer, and I've got a sponge dauber. Now, I don't know about you, but whenever I spray with my spritzer, it ends up going like to the sides, so I'm going to try really hard not to do that. So I've got my thing here. I've got one of my blocks down just to kind of capture any extra water, so I can just grab it with my dauber after, but you can see I'm just sprayed the end of my dauber. Okay, this didn't have any ink on it to start with. I've used it a few times for this technique, so it's got a little color in there, but I really just mostly clean. So I'm going to start with my flowers. I'm going to start with my red. So you could start with the lightest color. I just feel like starting with the red. Now what I'm going to do is I'm just daubing, right, with my dauber on top of that watercolor pencil, and it kind of helps dissolve the pigment and spread it around. And I'm just going to kind of trail from one image to the next. And if you want to, you can rub a little harder to move the color around a bit more. But you see how I combined the color between the two flowers? And I kind of just go down. So now I'm going to travel over to the third one. So I'm just going to turn my paper as I work. So I can have that color be outside the line. We're looking for, remember, we call it the Monet technique, so it's kind of a loose watercolor. Come to my fourth flower here. So in the end, my image ends up being colored, but it's also kind of blurred between the images. So I know this technique isn't for everybody, but it's kind of fun to do stuff that's different. Alright, so now I'm just going to kind of rub my dauber, get some of that red out. So now I'm going to do the yellow. So I'm going to spritz my sponge dauber again, grab some of that extra water, because we got a lot of yellow. Alright, so I'm going to start up here, and this time I'm just going to kind of go back and forth, because I can, right? It's a lot of yellow. So you can see it's already taken the lines of my pencil and smoothed them right out. When I get close to the flowers, I don't want to smudge too much over the top of that red I just did, but I don't mind getting close, right? Don't mind getting close at all. Okay, now I come down here to do the leaves. So these might blur a little more because there's a lot of green there, but first I'm going to try to just kind of do the yellow between them, and then I'll move to the green after. So I'm not trying to do the green right now, I'm just trying to go between the flowers and get that yellow color to loosen up and spread a little bit. Okay, so now I'm going to come over and grab some of this excess water off my thing, and now I'm going to go back in and do that green. So I'm kind of pouncing because I kind of want that effect of spreading the pigment, but not sending it too far. Okay, and I did stamp this on shimmer white. I didn't do it on the watercolor paper. I did do it on shimmer white, which is a little bit thicker. It takes watercolor techniques fairly well. And this doesn't get it too wet, it just kind of gets a little bit wet. Alright, so can you see how we went from the stamped cleaned image to the colored image to the watercolored image with a spritzer and a sponge and watercolor pencils? Isn't that kind of cool? So, alright, so this one, I'm going to keep it real simple. I'm going to fan this out for a minute. Dry it a bit. Paper needs to dry a bit. Okay, I can splotch it just a little so I can work with it for a second. Finish off the project for you. Okay, so I'm going to put this on the front of my card. I am going to use liquid adhesive just so I can get a really good connection between the two layers and help it stay flat. Now when I was thinking about this, I thought about using a ribbon to kind of help tack it down, but I kind of want it to stand alone. Kind of like a one layer card, and with the black it's kind of framing it. So I'm going to press this over and give that a good press to get that to adhere. And then I'm going to stamp my sentiment. Now, if you stamp your sentiment and it smudges or you don't like it, you can always put a tag over the top of it. But I kind of wanted to keep it simple, one layer card. So I've got my Thinking of You with All My Heart from the Peaceful Moments set. And I'm going to stamp it with my StazOn. Okay, so cross our finger, right? Let's hope I can get a nice clean sentiment here. So I'm going to go right here. Kind of a floating sentiment. Pull it up. Excellent. I think I've done that before. Okay, so there we go, guys. There's our Monet watercolor technique with watercolor pencils, spritzers, and dauber. So go get your fun supplies out and do something different today, okay? I hope you enjoyed it. Remember, my links are below for my store, my blog. Grab the tutorial and have some happy stamping. All right, everybody, thanks so much. I'll see you again soon, and please leave me a comment if this is something new or if you want to go try it yourself. Love ya. Bye-bye.